Well, for more on the US role in this war, we're joined by Nader Hashemi. He's an associate professor of Middle East politics at Georgetown University. Nader, what kind of pressure is the Biden administration coming under domestically in terms of its provision of arms to Israel, and where's that pressure coming from?
It's coming from within civil society, human rights groups, peace groups, segments of the American Jewish community, the Arab and Muslim community here, but critically from core elements within the Democratic Party that is really outraged over Biden's policy toward this conflict, which many people are saying is an explicit complicity in state-sanctioned war crimes. So I think that's really the backstory and the picture that we need to have in mind when we think about this question.
And as you say, it's coming from a core of the Democratic Party. What are they doing about it in terms of trying to force the arm of the US government in terms of providing more transparency about what these weapons might be used for? What are they doing?
Well, they're not doing very much because they're not in the senior levels of power in the Democratic Party and in the Biden administration. They're very much a minority voice. I think we have to remember that nationally, most Americans, unfortunately, still supports Biden's policy on Gaza. Within the Democratic Party, it's a mixed picture, but the senior ruling elites, the people who are advising the Biden administration on this topic, are still very pro-Benjamin Netanyahu, so they don't have the influence. In fact, what's happening is actually the opposite of what many people who care about this conflict want to see happen. It was just announced yesterday, after the disastrous, morally objectionable U.S. veto at the UN Security Council on a ceasefire, it was announced that the United States is rushing more weapons to Israel, bypassing a normal congressional review of the sale of arms to its allies so that Israel will have more tank shells to drop on the people of Gaza. And I've been told from people that Israel now has effectively run out of many of these weapons. And the Biden administration, at this critical moment, against the backdrop of this moral obscenity in Gaza, is actually going out of its way, bending over backwards to supply Israel with more weapons. And that just suggests, getting back to your question, that the influence of these voices within the Democratic Party who are calling for a stop to this war really don't have the influence that they seek.
I mean, some people would say that, the US has done this before. It did it in terms of getting weapons to Ukraine in order to help Ukraine mount its defense against Russia. And this is just a way of bypassing some of the red tape and the slowness that it takes in terms of getting this through Congress. What's your view?
I mean, that's true, but we've never seen a similar parallel where the United States, under Joe Biden, bypassing a normal, legally required congressional review of arms sales to Ukraine. We've seen it in the context of Israel. And I think this simply highlights the fact that this particular Biden administration is in lockstep, is very closely allied with Benjamin Netanyahu on this particular question. There's a level of coordination. In fact, just to cite one example, I was reading the statement just before your producer called me, put out by the U.S. Embassy at the United Nations, justifying the veto on Friday. And reading through the statement, it struck me that this is something that could have been written by Benjamin Netanyahu himself. It's almost identical to the propaganda line that we hear coming out of the Israeli government. There's very little difference. And I think that simply highlights the fact that there's something very unique happening here with respect to Biden's policy. Yes, it does send weapons to Ukraine and other allies, but normally those weapon sales goes through a certain review process. Not in this case, because I think the Biden administration very much wants to see Benjamin Netanyahu achieve its war aims in the Gaza Strip, regardless of what this means for the people of the Gaza Strip, for the stability in the region, and ironically, even for U.S. prestige on a global level.
And speaking of US prestige on a global level, how much of a problem is it for Biden personally and for his administration more generally if Israel is seen as unsuccessful in its mission in Gaza?
Well, I think it'll be a personal defeat for Joe Biden because he's deeply committed to supporting Netanyahu's war aims in Gaza. And I think this is having global repercussions. I mean, I just mentioned on Friday how the United States effectively stood against the entire world in vetoing what the entire world, almost the entire world, wanted was a ceasefire in Gaza. And so now the Biden administration has basically tied its cart to this Israeli war machine in Gaza. And everything that Israel does, all of the war crimes, all of the crimes against humanity, all of the attempted genocide are now going to be laid at the doorstep of Joe Biden because he's so strongly supportive and connected in so many ways, not just supporting Israel politically, diplomatically, but critically, militarily. I mean, these are U.S. Sponsored weapon sales that are taking place, falling on the people of Gaza in really record number. If you just look at, the data and the analysis, we're talking about, the equivalent of 2 Hiroshima bombs dropped on the most densely populated part of the world, the Gaza Strip, in 4 weeks, over 6,000 children killed. And the Biden administration, rather than stop this moral obscenity, is moving in the exact opposite direction of supplying more weapons to Israel, more political support. So I think these are very dark days for everyone, obviously for the Palestinians, but I also think it's very dark days for the United States. In terms of the Islamic world, I think it's accurate to say that Joe Biden now is the most hated U.S. president in the history of U.S. Islamic relations, much worse than George W. Bush. And that's actually quite a statement, given, the devastation in Iraq, given Abu Ghraib, given Fallujah, given the, instability that the United States unleashed in Iraq. For him to be much more hated than George W. Bush is really a reflection of this catastrophic policy that Joe Biden has pursued in Gaza. And I think this is going to haunt the United States, the Democratic Party, and it probably could even result in Joe Biden's defeat in the next presidential election.
Nader Hashemi from Georgetown University, your insight much appreciated.